All right, welcome Greek U Nation to episode number 162 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I am your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I am a speaker. I am author of the book From Letters to Leaders, Creating Impact on Your College Campus and Beyond. Fun fact, my first job out of college was as a collections manager for over $400 million worth of loans on tractor trailers. I would be calling guys who were late on their payments to either get their payment in with me over the phone, or we were probably coming to repossess their truck. Those were the two alternatives. My most famous client was somebody who was involved in the garbage industry all over New York. I'm going to let you read between the lines there, but we will leave that story for another day. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring fraternity and sorority leaders and college students together. My next guest had a simple goal. It was simply to meet 10,000 strangers. He believes that genuine human connection is something important in today's world, and it's also something that makes him happy. This journey is his way of leading by example. If anything, his hope is to encourage other people to take the initiative to reach out to someone new and be open to establishing new relationships, which I believe is also a very important lesson for all of our listeners who are heading into fraternity and sorority recruitment this fall. I can't wait to introduce you to the one and only Rob Lawless. Welcome, Rob.
Hey, Mike, thank you so much for having me, man.
Oh, of course. Are you kidding me? This is going to be amazing. I mean, I read your story and I read your project, and immediately I said, you know what? Rob has to tell our audience about what he's up to. They need to learn more about this because I think your project is absolutely incredible. I'd like to kind of just start from the beginning because I think it's easier for our listeners to understand the whole journey from start to finish. And, originally you decided on Penn State for your undergraduate experience. So I'm wondering, why was Penn State the right choice for you?
So I am the youngest of three in my family. I'm from the Philly suburbs originally. I am now 30. I have a brother who's 32 and a sister who's 36. And my sister made the decision to go to Penn State. And I was in 7th grade at the time. So when we moved her in, it was my mom and sister getting her dorm room set up together. And then my dad took my brother and I and was like, hey, let's just walk around campus while they get that set up. We'll just see what it's all about. And it was exactly what I thought college was supposed to look like. It's like a nice sunny day. There's the lawn, there's kids out throwing the Frisbee around. It was a college town, so you definitely felt like you were on campus. And once she went there, we started just paying more attention to it. I remember my dad was like, oh, they have a very traditional football team. They don't have the names on the back of their jerseys. It's basic blues, like black shoes type thing, and started watching the games and whatnot. But it had, for me, I think, the mix of academics and social life that I sought in a university setting. I went to Catholic school all my life, and my high school had 500 kids total. And me being an extrovert, a guy who's going to go out and try to meet 10,000 people, I wanted to be surrounded by a lot of people. So I went from this high school of 500 people to intro business classes at Penn State, where the room had more people than my entire high school. Like, there's a specific room, 100 Thomas at Penn State, that has, it seats like 600 people.
Right.
For some people, that is something that deters them because they want that small professor to student ratio. But for me, it was something that was exciting. And because my older siblings had went there, I kind of hit the ground running with involvement. So in August, I was already involved with the Penn State Dance Marathon, helping raise money for the fight against pediatric cancer. And then my spring of freshman year, I joined fraternity Beta Theta Pi. Sophomore year, I joined a tour guide club called Line Ambassadors. So we were part of the Alumni Association, helped put events on around campus, and then gave tours to prospective students. I did Habitat for Humanity trips every spring break, freshman, sophomore, and junior year. So I would travel to New Orleans, South Carolina, Miami, built houses every spring break. And then actually this shirt is, I was a homecoming captain and I did alumni relations for that. So I helped organize our homecoming efforts my senior year. So it was like every year I would add one new thing to the mix of what I was doing. So I would always, like, I had the fraternity all 4 years. I had the tour guide thing 3 years. I was involved in the Penn State Dance Marathon for all 4 years. And through that made a ton of connections. And I'll kind of stop there. But yeah, it had that split of academics and social life that I wanted. And I really got a lot out of both of those areas, friend-wise and career-wise.
Yeah. It's so funny that your sister went there, you went on campus and you immediately fell in love with it, watching the guys playing Frisbee. I mean, it's classic. I mean, as a parent, I will tell, other parents that, hey, if you go and you take your kid to a campus for a tour, chances are they're going to fall in love with the first place that they see. So be very careful about which campus you bring your kid to for the first time, because they're probably going to fall in love right away. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened with you. And that's really interesting. And then, what, I share a lot, in your story as well. I went to a private Hebrew school for basically first through eighth grade. And my class, I mean, we were probably, I could count the exact number, but we were probably 25 people in the class. And so, I was with the same 25 people for 8 years, first through eighth grade, and we had all grown up together, basically brothers and sisters, essentially. And then at the end of that experience, I was just like, man, I was like, I got to go out and see the world. Like, I feel so sheltered. And I didn't know anybody beyond these 25, and that was it. And I was like, my world is so small. And so eventually I went to a public high school. I had the option of continuing on to a private Hebrew high school, but I was like, absolutely not. Like, I have to expand my horizons. I can't keep meeting people that are just like me. Like, I have to meet other people. And so instinctively, I kind of knew that it was time to move on and it was time to go to a public high school. And that experience was a difficult one because everybody that went to the public high school, they already knew each other from, public elementary and junior high and all of that. So all of their friendships were already established. And so it was really hard for me. And funny story, I was eating lunch one day in the cafeteria at the public high school. I had no friends. So I'm sitting there eating lunch by myself, right? And all of a sudden, this very attractive woman comes and sits down next to me, and she's like, "I see that you're eating lunch by yourself. I figured I would come over and just eat lunch with you." And I'm like, "That is really nice of you." I'm like, here I am, all new, and I explained where I came from. So she was interested in my story, which was kind of cool. Coming from a private school and struggling to make friends in this new environment where everybody already knew each other. And here I am thinking I hit it off, and I'm like thinking that I'm going to come home later that day and I'm going to have a new girlfriend and everything is going to be amazing. And all of a sudden, like from behind me, after like maybe, I don't know, like 15 minutes of talking to her, from behind me comes this like huge guy wearing like a varsity football jacket. And he leans over, he gives her a kiss. He's like, "Hey, babe." And I'm like, "Oh,
too good to be true."
So in my mind, I had created this like fabrication that didn't even exist.
Of course.
But it was still, they had been dating, and we maintained, the three of us were good friends all throughout high school. So it all worked out. But it's just funny how things play out, I guess, in life. So that's a fun story that just kind of sticks with me.
Yeah.
You mentioned Beta Theta Pi at Penn State, and this was many years before the Timothy Piazza incident that happened at your chapter. I'm wondering, a couple of things. Number one, there were a lot of fraternities to choose from at Penn State. I don't have to tell you that. What made you want to join Beta Theta Pi in particular, and what were all the brothers like at that time?
Yeah. So I actually never really pegged myself as someone who was going to join Greek life. Like, I had gone to a couple of fraternities during my first semester. Like I said, I joined spring semester of freshman year. So actually, the way it happened, I was on my way to Philly for a JDRF walk, Juvenile Diabetes Research Fund, I think, or Foundation. But anyways, one of my friends has diabetes, so we were on the way to that event, and my other friend was like, "Hey, my dad did work on this house, or he like was doing like a electrical work or something on this house at Penn State." And he's like, everyone had been kicked off. They're bringing everyone back. They're trying to turn it into like an honors fraternity. They're recruiting leaders from around campus, and they just put like a bunch of renovations into the house and things like that. So it was a bit of a unique experience. And he was like, "I think I'm gonna try to join." And then my other friend was like, "I'm gonna try to join too." So we kind of talked about it in this ride, and then it was one of those things where you talk about it, you go back to class and stuff, and you're busy with your schedule. But then my friend actually did and got a bid, and then the other one got a bid too. And I was like, "Wait a second, I thought we all talked about this together. I want to join this as well." And it kind of just spread amongst our friend group, where we went and talked to, it was a guy from Nationals that was coordinating everything. And my pledge class was like 60 people.
Mm.
And it's so interesting the way that the direction of the fraternity ended up going, because I remember his name was Jeff Rundle. He was the guy from Nationals who we all sat and talked with. And when we talked with him, he was like, "It's understood that in this house there is no drinking. Like, even if you're 21, you're not allowed to drink in this house." They had some trouble with brothers in the past, so they really wanted to bring everyone back and kind of rebrand it as Beta's whole thing is men of principle. They
Mhm.
wanted it to be that type of fraternity, and the alumni had just put all this money into it because it was such a formative experience for him when he was a student. So we came back, and my whole pledging experience was, and there's talk about hazing and whatnot within fraternities or sorority recruitment. For me, literally, I would go to the house once a week on Sundays. We would learn a bit about the history. We would introduce ourselves to the other brothers. And that was basically it. Like, that was the entire process. And it was much more tied to the traditions of the fraternity and the lore type thing. Um, and like ritual type stuff, as opposed to anything hazing related. Um, but in my opinion, there's 60 people, and when you have that, there are certain people that wanted to get back to this social standing that Beta historically had at Penn State. I guess they were known as one of the cool party houses back in the day. So there was a group of guys that wanted to recreate that, and then there was a group of guys that were very on board with the new direction, and it kind of created maybe like a split amongst, I'm sure every fraternity has their cliques and every sorority has their cliques,
Mhm.
but I think that happened with us as well. So for me personally, there are guys from my fraternity who are my best friends to date. I've already talked to one of them today. Like, we had already texted. I was texting another one last night. I just stayed with one in DC on Friday. So some of my best friends in life who I now deem family are my fraternity brothers. And then there are people who I don't really talk to or haven't seen since I graduated. Um, and I guess that's probably standard for everyone, but that is how I would describe the brotherhood, is that I found people who became family, and then I have found people that I just happened to go to school with during that time.
Yeah. That's a really interesting story. And what I would say is that if you're a founding father of your fraternity, or founding sister for that matter, or if you're rebuilding, right? You're coming back and you're rebuilding an existing chapter, but you're really kind of the first set of new brothers in this organization, at least the second time around.
Mm.
Either way, I would say to you that these are some of the most successful people that you'll find. Because typically they are handpicked by somebody from the international or national headquarters, and they're really looking for people that fit the values of the organization, men of principle, right? And so I will say to you that those are some of the best people that you'll ever find, are those people who start organizations, fraternities and sororities, and they go on to become extremely successful in life. So that's a huge credit to you. I will never be a founding father. I joined an existing chapter and I didn't found anything. I mean, it was there already, but my point in saying all of this is that over time, obviously the national headquarters no longer starts choosing who the new members are into the fraternity over time. We basically delegate that responsibility to the chapter itself. And now it's their job to then go and find more men of principle at Penn State. And so sometimes that goes well, and everything is fine. And other times it doesn't. And, sometimes, if there is a cultural problem, for example, at a particular university, sometimes we see those standards basically go to that lowest denominator, on campus, which is unfortunate. Or sometimes, just like you said, you could have people that remember the fraternity as a certain type of organization, parties, whatever, socials, etc. And sometimes the alumni are pushing to go in that kind of direction. And the alumni have a lot of power. I mean, the alumni many times own the house. I mean, talk about power over college students. That's a huge power play right there. So there's all these variables that go into it, and most of the time it works out just fine. Sometimes they take a wrong turn, and sometimes we're adding people to the fraternity that maybe don't have the values of the organization, and that is where we get into trouble. That is where we have an issue. Sometimes fraternities do just fine choosing it on their own. And then other times the national headquarters has to come in and do what's called the membership review to actually interview all the brothers or all the sisters of the organization to ensure that they really do match the values of the organization, and maybe kick some people out that don't really belong there. So, it's just a fascinating experience, and it can go all different kinds of directions. I'm obviously very sad for what happened specifically to Timothy Piazza and the Piazza family. Obviously, it really changed fraternity and sorority life, I think, forever. And I'm grateful for his family to get involved and to try to work to make fraternity and sorority better. I'm grateful for all of my other speakers, not only at Greek University, but there are other companies out there that really have similar missions as Greek University to make the fraternity and sorority experience a better one. So part of this podcast is really to teach and to educate and to try to fight for fraternity done right, because when you do fraternity right, I believe that it is the best leadership experience on any college campus, whether that be Penn State or anywhere else. When it's done wrong, then obviously the results can be disastrous, as we've seen. And that's obviously the exception. It's not the rule. But we're fighting to make sure that fraternities and sororities stay for the long haul, that we protect our members, that we protect our guests, and with that comes a lot of education in order to make sure that we stay on track. And I think, one part of the success of organizations over time, in terms of what do I see in successful chapters over and over again, it's usually alumni involvement, and really good alumni involvement. When alumni are not involved with the chapter, they're not mentoring the brothers or the sisters in the chapter, that's when I start to see things kind of fall off the rails gradually until we have a problem. So that's another thing that I would encourage, is alumni involvement. I think it's incredibly important for the students, for the chapter, and for the overall health of the organization.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And
yeah. So, all right, cool. Well, after that, you started working at venture funded RJ Metrics, and you were working as a sales rep, and now you're cold emailing people every day, asking them to hop on the phone with you for 30 minutes to talk about your product or the company's product. And these are some of the actual responses you got. I absolutely love these responses. One response you got when you cold emailed them was, "Take me off your mailing list, cockroach." Another one, "I understand that this is your job. That being said, if asking a girl out for coffee and she ignores you twice and finally says no, you do not ask whether this is just now or now forever. And you certainly do not ask her why you are not her type." And then the third response you got, cold emailing customers or potential customers, was, "Not interested, and you're really starting to annoy me." So, I mean, I can see how this would be a really difficult thing for you. Not a lot of people are used to, rejection. And I'll tell you, one of the jobs that I had while I was in college to make money was basically selling books door to door, in California of all places where I had never been. And the rejection rate, I mean, is probably 96%. And most human beings aren't conditioned to a 96% rejection rate. We don't know where the 4% is.
Mhm.
We have to go and find it. And it's a question mark. You have a map of houses and you know that 4% is yes, but you don't know which house is a yes. And you don't know until you go and knock on the door and have that conversation. And incredibly challenging, but it taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about resilience and just building relationships and building rapport quickly with other people. It taught me a lot, that experience. I'm not saying it's for everybody, but I will say that I learned a lot, and it really did set me up for success later in life. But I mean, tell us about your experience at RJ Metrics. I mean, how hard was it to keep going when you kept getting that kind of rejection?
I actually, it didn't bother me that much having the rejection, and it stings every once in a while if you take it personally, but I think one of the things that I was able to do was remove myself from the situation. Like, it's not like these people knew about my background and knew about my character and who I was as a person, and they gave me those responses knowing that. What they knew is a guy had emailed them 4 times and they were starting to get pissed off that his name kept showing up in their inbox, and they didn't like the idea of me, which was fine because if I were in their situation, I don't think that I would respond negatively like they did, but I could understand where they were coming from. And the other thing is, I went into sales thinking that it was going to be like a very human type role. So I studied finance at Penn State. I did consulting for Deloitte for a year and 3 months. And I thought that I was like, great, like client interaction. This is going to be cool because I'm such a people person. The reality was I'm spending 12 hours a day behind PowerPoint slides and Excel sheets and formatting and making sure the color is consistent throughout. So it wasn't as human as I thought it would be. And then I get into sales and I'm thinking, okay, well, I'll just establish this rapport with people and get to know them, and it'll be, I'm a people person, it'll be fun. And then what I realized, it's a lot of filling the top of the funnel and being good at establishing that rapport when you actually get people on the phone, but is much more a system and numbers game than anything else. So it's like, if you send out 100 emails per day, if 5 of those people are going to get on the phone with you and 1 will move forward or whatever, then it's just like, okay, this is predictable. I just have to follow this process. And I think understanding and looking at things from more of a process and a system standpoint, it removed the emotional side of things for me. And I was able to just get into that flow. I always save those messages because I just thought they were funny. And much like you learned from your sales experience,
Sure.
same with me. I don't know if you and I would be having this conversation right now if I didn't have that experience, because I saw your site. I thought what you were doing was interesting. I was like, let me just give them a call and see what's up. And
Mhm.
here we are chatting together. And I think for what I'm doing now, I mean, with my project in general, when I first started, I had nothing to show for it other than an idea that I wanted to meet 10,000 people and I wanted people to be part of it. So I would send emails out to people, introduce myself and say, hey, I'm trying to meet 10,000 people. Do you want to be one of the first 10? And if they rejected me, I didn't care. I was just looking for people to be part of it. And actually, a lot of people took very kindly to the idea because there was no agenda. And I think people are so used to there being an agenda. So the sales experience really helped me with that. And then when reaching out for partnerships, when reaching out for speaking gigs, it's one of the most valuable skills that I think I've gained in my career because I just don't have fear around it now. Like, I'll email universities, and if I don't hear back, I'll follow up 2, 3, 4 times. And I'm okay with sending stuff out into the void because I know on that 4th time, someone will get back to you and that leads to an opportunity. So I'm thankful for that.
Yeah. I agree. I'm thankful for the experience too. It taught me a lot, and I think it does help me every single day. So I'm thankful for that experience. So let's talk about Rob's 10K friends. You started this project to see if you can meet with people. You want to chat with them for 1 hour for absolutely no reason, no agenda, like you talked about. You held your first meeting on November 11th. 2015, and obviously you were rejected way less because you have no agenda. The responses were all positive and encouraging, and you've certainly met a lot of amazing people along the way with incredible backgrounds, and they would all consider themselves to be normal people, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, talk to us a little bit about the beginning of the project. Let's say from 0 to, I don't know, 50. I mean, how did that all play out?
0 to 50 was there's a website in Philadelphia. So I was living in Philly at the time because I was still working at RJ Metrics, the tech startup,
Mhm.
and I started this alongside it. And there's a website called billypenn.com. It's basically like millennial news in the city to be consumed on a computer or on your phone. And they have a who's next list. So who's next in the political scene in Philly? Who's next in the culinary scene? Who's next in the art scene? And I said, okay, well, those are the people I'm going to reach out to because I wanted this journey to be something where I hit people from all different backgrounds and industries. And I just took that list and I started emailing people from it. Started with the art list because I love music and the artistic side of life. And I found a couple of people through that. I also Googled Philadelphia artists, and there's a website called inliquid.com that just lists local artists and their work. And if I thought someone's paintings looked cool, I would shoot them an email. And I got people that way who would meet with me. And then it kind of was word of mouth. I started talking to people about the project, and they would be like, oh, you know who you should meet is this person. They would be really interesting for you to chat with. And that still happens all the time. But I met one person in November of 2015, and then I met 4 people that December, met 4 people that January, 5 people that February, and then it just kind of picked up more and more. And in the first 8 months, I met like 109 people or 110 people because at the 8 month mark, the company that I worked for was bought out and I was laid off as a result of that. So I decided to jump into this full time. But it was from an entrepreneurial standpoint, something that I was able to build alongside work. And I feel like I've heard people say that in the past, like use your free time to build your dreams. And then when that becomes too busy, maybe it's time to switch from or like leave your job to go into it full time. For me, it wasn't exactly that because the company had laid me off as part of the acquisition and I automatically had this free time. But I knew that I was enjoying it. Like within the first 50 people, I knew that it was something I would be willing to do full time. And then when I had the opportunity to do so, my whole mindset was so I was laid off in July of 2016 and I thought, okay, I have 1 month of severance so I can risk free meet people full time. And if it's going well, then I'll continue. And if not, I'll go back to Deloitte or I'll go to KPMG or PwC or whatever. And I kind of kept that mindset throughout. Um, but yeah, also just something to note, the month leading up to me being laid off, I was covered by a few different press sources in Philly, all small things. I had like a few articles, one TV spot that aired at like 5 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. But because that was the first press that I had gotten on the project, it felt very big to me and it felt very important. And I think that gave me the confidence to be like, okay, people are going to pay attention to this. Like that's a small piece of validation in the journey that I'm on,
Mhm.
which has turned out to be true because as I have met more and more people, the press that I've received has gotten bigger and bigger. And I always did have in the back of my mind, like, hey, if I fail with this, if I run out of money, I can go back into consulting. But fortunately, I haven't had to do that. And I feel like things are just now finally starting to click in terms of I see how I can self-fund myself using the knowledge that I've gained from my experience and just taking it to universities or taking it to corporations.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'm very excited about the future of the project.
That's incredible. I mean, this story is just huge because now you've met over 4,400 people from over 60 countries, 35 US states. You've driven across the country 6 times, and you've also been featured by, I mean, amazing press sources. We're talking about Ryan Seacrest on his nationally syndicated radio show, On Air with Ryan Seacrest, as well as Your Morning, a national Canadian morning show, and the Today Show with Hoda and Jenna. And you also got to appear as a guest on the Kelly Clarkson show, where the audience was made up of 100 of your friends from this particular project. So this is huge. I mean, this is not a small thing anymore. How did you manage to get all of this amazing press and the appearances on the big shows? I mean, how did you go from like local newspaper, in Philly to now, being on the Kelly Clarkson show? How did that happen?
All organically. It is all just through connections, and that's always kind of been my approach with the project is I'll just continue to do it, and if people think it's cool, then they'll think it's cool, and I'll let the market tell me how interesting my work is. And like now being 4,400 people into this project, people take me much more seriously than they did when I was 400 people into it. Because you say you're going to meet 10,000 people and people are like, okay, yeah, cool, like I'm sure. And it's really something where you have to prove it out. Same thing with me being like, I think this could be a legitimate career path. Now that things are starting to fall into place, people are like, oh, okay, so he did have something here. And the Ryan Seacrest I had met, it's a very long trail of people that goes back to the first girl who introduced me to the first piece of press that was done on me. But essentially, um, like, no, that it like I met a lot of people, and I met this one guy, Ryan, the first summer I lived in Los Angeles, which was the summer of 2017, and he had done a partnership with me. He ran a company called Serengeti. It's a travel brand. Like they make T-shirts, and the pockets are sourced from different areas around the world, and they would give proceeds back to those artisans. But I met with him, and then he partnered with me. So they had made a post on their Instagram account about me. And then this girl, Morgan from Oregon, had followed me for like a year, and then she moved to LA. And in 2018 said, hey, I'm in LA now. We should meet for your project. So we did. I met with her. She reposted our photo to her Instagram account. And one of her friends just happened to be a producer for Ryan Seacrest's radio show. And I got an email from her the next day, which was crazy. And that was the first time. And then a few months ago, I got another email from a producer for his show because he had heard about my project through a girl that I had met who was talking about my project in a clubhouse room. So it's all just this word of mouth kind of stuff. And Kelly Clarkson happened because of some of the trails of press where eventually someone in Philadelphia, NBC Philadelphia, did a piece on me. They put it out the summer of 2019, and Kelly's show was new at the time, and they have this good neighbor kind of theme to it, and I fit that perfectly. So I got a DM from her producer that was like, hey, I'm a producer for the Kelly Clarkson show. We would love to have you on as a guest. And then it's a phone call, and it's a Skype interview to see if I'm cool enough to be on the actual show. And yeah, they suggested that I contact everyone that I had met in LA, because at this point I've probably met 800 people in Los Angeles, so I have a pretty big network there.
Mhm.
And I invited all of them to the show, and those who could make it showed up, and it was a really unique experience for me, one I'm very thankful to have. And the Today Show, my brother LinkedIn messaged one of the producers, and I don't think she normally found people that way, but I think she found the story interesting, and we just got in touch April of 2020, and then kind of like kept in touch and followed up and stuff, and we recorded in July of 2020 and put that out. And yeah, I mean, that stuff is very helpful when talking to people or talking about the project, because it does give it a bit more credibility.
For sure, for sure. That is an incredible story. And you've also had some big sponsorships as well. So talk to us about the sponsorships, the financial side of this. Who have you worked with, and how would a sponsorship work?
In the beginning, I worked with a lot of Philly companies, ranging from my very first partnership was a mom and pop pharmacy called Fishtown Pharmacy in the Fishtown neighborhood of Philadelphia. And so I started tagging them in every post, and at the end of my captions, for context, each person I meet, I take a photo with them, I make a post, and then I write what I've learned about their lives, kind of in a story narrative form. And then I write how we met. And at the bottom of that, I was putting presented this month by Fishtown Pharmacy. And then this urgent care center that was new in Philly reached out to me and said, hey, what's the deal with your sponsorship? We're interested, we're new, and we see that you're tagging them. And I was like, oh, I'm just trying to get to monthly sponsors and have people sponsor me for the month, and I'll tag them in every post. And I met with the CEO for my project. He had an understanding of who I was, and then he sponsored me for that month. And then it was a dentist office, a leadership company, a dog walking company, a wedding band, a photographer, just a random mix of people. But all of these people had been part of my project. And as much as it was a sponsorship, it was like a donation because they wanted to see me succeed in what I was doing because they had met me and known me. And as the press kind of grew a little bit, when I was out in LA, I did a partnership with Peace Tea, which is a umbrella. It's under the umbrella of Coca-Cola. They just emailed me. I can't even remember. The guy heard about me on a podcast that I had done and emailed me because they were doing this random acts of kindness campaign. So I did random acts of kindness with the people that I met through my project, where I helped a woman paint her daughter's bedroom, or um, I was met with this one kid who was a magician, and he did a trick where he asked like the waiter that the place we met, the waiter gave him $1, and he like turned it into 20 and gave it back to him. So things like that. And then I did Penn Medicine. My sister works in marketing for them, and they were looking for people in the Philly area to kind of humanize their surgeons and tell their stories. And I was like the perfect candidate for that. So I met with 6 of their surgeons and told their stories like I do with everyone, and just talked about Penn Medicine. And then WeWork is the biggest one that I had, where I had a 9-month partnership with them where they paid me to meet people at their locations 1 day out of every week. And that one was great. I mean, even before we partnered together, I had met tons of people in WeWork spaces, because the type of person who gets a space at WeWork is exactly the type of person who understands what I'm doing. Like, they understand the community and the entrepreneurship. So that was great. I would just go into their spaces. I would show them off through my Instagram stories, and I would tag them in the posts every Wednesday of every month. And that went all the way till March 6th of 2020. And the next week there was no more in-person things for anyone. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, talk to us about that. I mean, how did things change for you and your project during this pandemic, which, is still technically, I mean, it's going on. I mean, how did things change?
I took everything virtual.
Mhm.
I met 3,259 people in person, and I never intended to do any virtual meetings because I wanted to force myself to go to other cities, go to other countries. And yeah, obviously we couldn't be doing that during the pandemic, so I went virtual, and it's a blessing in disguise. I mean, I've met people from over 80 countries at this point, and I've learned so much about the world. And in terms of speaking too, like I just spoke last week to Amazon's diversity, equity, and inclusion team. And when we were having our initial talks, the woman that I was talking to said, "We love your story, but the one question I get is, what about the DEI angle?" And I was like, "Oh, well, I've met people from over 80 countries. I've talked to every like religion, race, background, sexual orientation, gender. I've talked to them all, and I've found a way to have really great conversations with people who are completely different than I am." And I think that this last year opened me up a lot in terms of my global perspective. And I'm really appreciative of that. Like, I think about things now. Like, I was just talking with a rabbi in South Africa last week, and he's telling me about some political unrest going on there that I wouldn't really know about if I wasn't tuned into world news or having these types of conversations. Or at the start of the pandemic last year, I talked to a girl in Chile, and she's telling me about all the protests that are happening down there because they raised the bus fare, and just things that I could go on with my life without ever really hearing about because we get so overwhelmed with news here, uh, but now become relevant to me. And I feel like if I were to drop into any of those 80 countries, I have a host, I have someone who's going to show me around. And yeah, I'm excited about that because I still do intend to travel physically in the future once it's okay to do so.
Mhm.
But now it's like my network is already in place, whereas before it would have just been me putting out Instagram stories of, hey, I'm traveling to Germany this week. Can anyone meet or introduce me or whatever? Yeah.
Such a cool story. It's so amazing. And I agree with you. I think in many ways, the pandemic has kind of been a blessing in disguise in that it's forced us to look at our business and reevaluate and figure out new ways of reaching fraternity and sorority students all over the country. And it has brought the cost down, which has enabled us to reach even more students
Mhm.
while we were in this pandemic. So, ordinarily you would never think that that would be the case because ordinarily we're on a stage with 4,000 students in the audience, but in this scenario now suddenly we're available on Zoom. We can do 3 4 universities a day, whereas before it was like one university for 3 days because there's travel time too and travel time back. And so we became more efficient as a company and we reduced our travel expenses, hotel, flights, all of that stuff. And so we passed on the savings to the customer. And now college students, more college students than ever, use Greek University over the past year because it was more accessible. So never in a million years would I think that it would have played out that way, but it certainly did. And so I'm grateful for that because it really was kind of a blessing in disguise for us to look at our business critically and say, is there a better way to reach even more students than what we've been currently doing? And the answer was yes.
Mm.
Really, really fascinating how things change. And so, let's talk about our audience, the college students, and specifically fraternity and sorority members. What lessons do you think that fraternity and sorority members who are listening right now, what can they learn from your project?
I think from my project and my path in general, the importance of those connections and maintaining those connections. Like my advice to any university student would be get involved early and often because it to me it's not the textbook is not going to land you your job. Of course, if you're studying engineering or something, you want to know the math behind it and all of that stuff, but that's not going to be the thing 10 years from now that says, oh, my company has an opening, we want to bring you in, or the thing that is like, hey, let's all get together for a vacation and find that fulfillment that we had from our time in school together. To me, people are the most important piece of the equation of happiness, and you get those bonds through Greek life organizations, and it is, I guess, what you put into it is what you get out of it as well. And my friends and I fortunately have made it a priority to keep in touch over the years, and weddings always like in the same wedding parties with each other. Before the pandemic, it was like this 2-year period where we saw each other every 3 months because we were either on a bachelor party or at a wedding. And it was such a cool time of life because that first year or two after school, you keep in touch, but a lot of you are investing in your careers and establishing yourselves. But we had this nice arc of coming back together, and now it's my fraternity brothers. I'm at their daughter's first birthday party, or I'm meeting their 2-month-old son for the first time, or one is due in January. So those things I think are really important. And I think when it comes to life in general, I always say there's not much that I care about other than spending time with the people that I love. That's like baseline happiness, and then everything else is kind of built onto that. But you get that baseline happiness through finding your tribe, if you will, and that's something that you can do in college when you're creating memories, whether it's like out at parties or doing volunteer work together or being in chapter. Those are the times where you create those bonds, and they stick with you throughout life, and it's really important to have that.
Mhm. I agree completely with your assessment on the lessons to be learned. And I think, as I think about your project, I think about the fact that many fraternity and sorority members today, they're really kind of in silos. That's the best way that I can explain it. And what I mean by that is that they typically, hang out with people either just in their chapter or perhaps just in their council,
Mm.
but they don't reach out to others And what I mean by that is, other councils that might be different than their own. So, are we really, if we're in IFC, are we really reaching out to NPHC and other councils, multicultural organizations on campus, or do we have no, knowledge of who they are, how to reach them, or what they're about, or learn anything about their culture? I mean, and it's such a missed opportunity, I think, for fraternity and sorority members today when they operate in those silos, because think about the missed opportunities. Think about how small their network is versus what it could be had they reached out. And I think, we have more in common than, differences, at that stage in life, certainly. And so, I would just encourage people who are listening right now to reach out to people outside of their own chapter, people in other councils, and start working on those connections, because ultimately that network is gonna get you very far. And I think your project is a testament to that, because you don't really know who that person in some other council is going to introduce you to open up a job opportunity, to open up a sponsorship, to open up the Kelly Clarkson show. I mean, you just never know. And if you just stay in your bubble and you stay in your silo, all of those opportunities will never manifest themselves. So, so that would be something that I look at your project. I'm like, there's a lot of lessons that we can talk about here. And certainly I think for fraternity and sorority recruitment, I mean, just going out and talking to people and having conversations, I think with no agenda, is super important, because I think that's the key. I think, especially fraternity guys, I mean, we get into our heads a little bit about, what are we going to talk to this person about, and getting really nervous, like, how do I sell Beta Theta Pi to this new person who I'm meeting? It's not about that. It's just about building relationships with other people and just bonding about anything, about sports, about what's going on in town, anything. You don't even have to mention the fraternity. It's all about the relationship. And so that is the message about your project. It's all about the relationship, and then everything else comes after, because now you've built a connection. And with that connection, you can do anything. And, I think what's true for me is that, my big brother in the fraternity, his name is Rich, we started working out at the gym for like 6 months before recruitment even started. And we're working out, we're doing 4 days on, 1 day off. And we did that for 6 months at the gym. And after 6 months of hanging out with this guy, and he's teaching me his whole workout regimen, which I had no knowledge of. He taught me everything I know about working out, and I still use exactly what he taught me today, right? 25 years later. But my point is that, when he asked me, hey, do you want to come to a recruitment event after 6 months of working out? What do you think my answer was? Of course. Like, why wouldn't I? We've been just hanging out, shooting the crap for 6 months. I'll do whatever you want. Where do you want to go? Let's go,
Yeah.
And I think that's really what we need to start focusing on, is just the relationships. It's not the big event. Nobody joins, a fraternity or sorority because of the big event. They join because of the relationships. They join because of the connection. They wanted to hang out with certain people that are in that organization. And that's what matters to them. It's not the big event. You can go anywhere at Penn State and have a big party. Okay. That's not unique to a particular fraternity. Let's not kid ourselves. So I think that's, there's so many lessons. I mean, I could draw so many lines based on your project. And I'm sure there were a few meetings of your 4,400 to date. I'm sure there were a few meetings that really stand out to you. Which meetings are kind of the most memorable for you? Can you share that with us?
There's one guy recently who I've thought about a lot, because, and of course, like, just touching on the lessons as well, one of the things I think that I've gotten out of this journey is like a sense of belonging. And I think you get that in a fraternity or whatever organization you're in college, and perspective, like learning about someone's life who has gone differently than yours, or they have grown up with different circumstances than you. I think learning that is a really important thing for anyone in the world, and something that everyone should do as they get older. But there was a guy that I met, and he runs an organization, I think it's called Cure Rare Disease. And his younger brother has Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, which is a progressive disease, and the life expectancy for people with this disease is 26 years old. And the guy that I met is 29, and his whole kind of goal through life is like, I want to extend my brother's life. I want to save my brother's life. And he did Cornell undergrad, and then he worked for 2 years, and then he went back to get his MBA at Harvard. And he's like, I'm going to get to the best schools so I can make a lot of money, put it towards research. And while he was at Harvard, he realized that I don't have as much time to just, it's inefficient for me to push money into research and hope that something's being done. So he met someone tied to Yale in some way that they had helped cure like a rare disease for some girl. And this set him on this path of trying to do the same thing for his own brother, where they took a biopsy of his brother's muscle, looked at it. He described it as like, that's basically understanding the lock so you can create the key to unlock it. They looked at his brother's cells in a petri dish and were able to correct them there. Then they were able to do a mouse study. And then he got to the point where he's developing a drug. I have to check in with him. It's supposed to be developed by June and then go through FDA approval and whatnot. And if all of that goes well, then he's going to administer this drug to his brother at the end of this year, early next year, to try to save his life. And his brother is now 26. And like I said, the life expectancy is 26. So that being said, I can go through my project and feel the pressure of getting older, and like my friends are getting married and having kids, and I'm not in that place yet, or I haven't had the finances to do what all of my friends have done yet. And sometimes that can feel like a lot of pressure. But if you take my story and you compare it to his, look at the pressure of his. He, when we were talking about dating, he's like, I can't go out and date because that pulls time away from me being able to make progress in my effort to save my brother's life. And the stakes are so much higher than him. If he succeeds, like, what better success to have in your life? And if he fails, or I don't think there's really a failure, but like say he's not able to get the drug there in time or whatever, like I am interested to see like what effect that would have on his life, because he's putting his whole life into this. And to me, there's nothing more admirable than that. I think like we can get stressed at our day job or whatnot, but when I'm at Deloitte and I'm working 12 hours a day, like how important is it really that the color blue is the same shade on slide 1 as it is 11? I understand it makes sense in a business context, but I'm not saving my younger brother's life here. You know what I mean? So stories like that have given me a ton of perspective, and I just think about that all the time. And I think that has allowed me to push myself further and harder than maybe the average person, because I can contextualize everything.
Yeah. That's really interesting and important. I think, as I've gotten older, I've started to think about, what is the impact that I'm making on this world? How am I making this world a better place?
Mm.
And that to me is much more important than, selling more widgets, right? Whatever that company is. And so I think early on in our careers, often we will get into companies where the goal is to just sell more widgets. But it feels very hollow to me. And over time, I recognize like this isn't the place for me. I need to make a big impact. I need to do something to make this world a better place, so that way I can look back on it and say, this is what I did, and I'm proud of it. And so that's kind of what I've tried to follow, and those things have become more and more important. So I guess your priorities over time are going to shift.
Mm-hmm.
For all of our listeners, if you're in college right now, what's a priority to you right now could be a big house. It could be driving a fancy car. It could be having a hot spouse. I mean, these things are things that might be very important to you, and I'm not suggesting that they have no value. But what I am suggesting is that over time, those priorities are going to change. And so be open to those things and listen to those inner voices that are guiding you and trying to get you to do something to make this world a better place. Because ultimately, I think that is our purpose. That is why we were put on this earth. It's probably not to collect more material possessions.
I
So,
totally agree.
so, but I mean, you have to take time to get to that place where you recognize those things. So anyway, but we do love good food here at Fraternity Foodie Podcast, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you what's your favorite restaurant in the Philly area that I need to check out, because I'm in Philly often. My wife is from Philadelphia, so I get back there quite often. We were actually there probably 2 months ago. So is there a particular restaurant that you really love in that area?
There, so I lived in the Northern Liberties neighborhood, and there's a restaurant called North Third, is right
Uh-huh.
around the corner from where I lived. That was a really good spot. I have a nostalgia towards coffee shops because my project was built in coffee shops.
Ooh,
There's La Colombe in Fishtown. It's on Frankfurt Ave. That is one of the best spots, in my opinion, to grab coffee, one of the greatest atmospheres. And then for the classic cheesesteak recommendation, for me, it's Delisandro's, which
nice.
is not in like Center City. It's a little bit outside, but when I was in high school, I played on the golf team, and after our golf matches at the course right there, we would all walk to get cheesesteaks there. And my personal opinion is your preference of cheesesteak depends on your emotional ties to it. So that's where mine come from. But it's a good place.
Delisandro's, there you go. There's the Philly cheesesteak for everybody, all of our listeners to go and check out. That
Yep.
sounds absolutely amazing. And, I also want to make sure that if our listeners are listening right now and they're interested in your project, they want to, meet with you, or they have recommendations on people who you should be meeting with. Where should people go to follow you on social media to learn more about the project, maybe be a part of the project, or maybe they want to book you to speak on their college campus about this experience? Where should our listeners go to learn more?
I'm on Instagram at Rob's 10K Friends, so ROBS10K Friends. That is where I document the story of every single person that I've met. Um, and that's kind of, people can get in touch with me there to meet for speaking engagements, etc. My Instagram DMs are kind of like my email inbox, but I can also be found on email at robs10kfriends@gmail.com. I have a website that is robs10kfriends.com. And lastly, I'm on TikTok at robs10kfriends. And TikTok is kind of like a playground for me to share a little bit about some of the lessons I'm learning or more of my backstory. But yeah, the main thing is Instagram, but I'm accessible through all of those channels.
That's awesome. That is really good. I'm sure you're going to have a bunch of interview requests and recommendations from this particular podcast episode. So I can't wait to see, what happens from here in terms of your adventure and some of the new people that you're going to be meeting. And I'm certain that you're going to be on college campuses all across the country. I think there's really so many lessons to be learned from this project. I don't even know where to begin, but,
Mhm.
you can start mapping it out and we could be talking about it for days. But there's so many great lessons here. And I hope that the college students that are listening really kind of think about it and put those things into action to start increasing their network and figuring out, how they can use all the contacts that are on a college campus and beyond, to further their goal, whatever their mission happens to be. Really, really interesting stuff, man. I've really enjoyed getting to know you and just learning more about this project. I think it's a fascinating experiment, and it's just one of those things that, the deeper you get into it, the bigger your network is, and the more opportunities that you're going
Mhm.
to have. So by the time you reach that 10,000 goal, which I know you will, your network is just so huge. You have so many people that are willing to speak on your behalf that
Mhm.
all you have to do is put a request out to your followers and they will come and bring you what it is that you're looking for. It's amazing.
Yes. Yeah, that's how relatively new to the speaking world, but I've landed gigs by saying, "Hey, I'm trying to speak. Can you connect me with your universities?" And
Right.
students make introductions. I talk to those people, gigs get landed, and yeah, speaking or otherwise, the network has been really great, and yeah, it's less than halfway done.
Right. That's just absolutely incredible. And just, thinking about, you traveling to other cities and basically just making an announcement that I'm in wherever, I'm in Germany,
Hmm.
some city in Germany, and you're going to have people that are going to come out to want to meet you, based on recommendations and other people maybe that you've interviewed in Germany, right?
Yeah.
So just fascinating, fascinating stuff. And, it does, kind of remind me when I travel and I'm speaking on college campuses, I usually make a post. I'll take a picture in front of the sign
Hmm.
at a particular college or university, and I'll throw that up on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. And then suddenly, like you said, with Instagram being your inbox, I mean, suddenly I'll get a bunch of messages from people who I haven't heard from in years,
Hmm.
guys that I went to college with, or, people who I worked with, at some company 20 years ago. And then they're like, oh, wow, I saw that picture that you're in town. I'd love to get together for dinner. I'd love to get together for coffee. And then, all these new opportunities open up. So certainly, I don't know that I'm going to meet 10,000
Hmm.
people and spend an hour with them. I've certainly met that many people in an audience, but not spending an hour with each one of them individually.
Hmm.
So I believe in what it is that you're doing. I believe in the power of the network. I see it, certainly with me and my travels and some of the connections that I've made over the years. And I'm certainly, very grateful to the fraternity for starting that process. I'm grateful to, that book sales job, going door to door selling books out in California over a summer as a college student. These are things that, you take those lessons and you turn them into, huge opportunities. And so I'm just grateful, for all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Because it certainly has helped me get to where I am. And I think the same thing is true for you. Those lessons that you're learning have helped you get to this point.
Yeah. And I'm curious because I was holding back a little on asking you questions, but what is the like 5-minute synopsis of your path? Like
Yeah,
of where
man. I
you're
mean, the path is not a traditional one. Certainly not. I think my path was, as I mentioned in the intro here when we first started talking. My first job was a collections manager. Calling people who were late on their payments for their tractor trailers. And I think what I learned from that particular position, it's such a big company, and I was outperforming. I was doing really, really well. Out of 50 branches, we were always, in the top three in terms of delinquency and things like that. Like we were really doing amazing. And when that happened year over year over year, I'm like, I'm sitting here, I'm busting my tail and I'm getting the results. So I'm like, I think I should be getting paid accordingly. Like, I think I should be rewarded for being one of the top performers in the company, in a publicly traded company. But because it was such a big company, they had certain guidelines. They're like, well, if you're going to get promoted or you're going to get a raise, I mean, it's, you fit into this bucket. And so you get a 1% raise because you fit into this bucket. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I'm the best performer,
mm,
in my job, like, across the country. And so to me, immediately I recognize, I'm like, so I don't think I can work for big companies because there's so much bureaucracy and there's so much red tape, and there are these boxes that they try to put you in which don't fit. And for me, it just didn't make any sense. And so I learned very quickly that it just wasn't the right place for me, that more of an entrepreneurial type spirit, fits me a little bit better. And so I started working for some entrepreneurs. I started working for a Cisco Premier partner selling Cisco hardware. And that company went from, startup to over $25 million in annual sales in 5 years. We had opened up offices in New York City, in Amsterdam, and in India as well. And, it just taught me, kind of working alongside the CEO. I was handling all the finances because I had a degree in accounting. So I was handling all the finances, but I was also watching the CEO and how he built a $25 million company while I watched, and took all of those steps with him, right? And so I learned a lot from that process that ordinarily I would never learn on a college campus. And it taught me how to build my own company from nothing, from the ground up. And so again, I'm very thankful for those opportunities because what ended up happening was, I started developing these websites and started doing search engine optimization before search engine optimization was even a word. And I was doing it in my spare time while during the day I was like CFO. And it got to the point where, I was building websites and doing search engine optimization at night and on the weekends. And I was earning more money at night and on the weekends than during my day job as a CFO in Manhattan. And at that point, I just showed all of these checks to my wife. And she's like, man, she's like, there's money coming from everywhere. And I'm like, yeah, I'm like, I think it's time for me to quit my day job. And she agreed. And then, I started my own web design and search engine optimization company that took off like a rocket. And I kind of recognized that a lot of this success really came from, the fraternity, from me learning how to motivate other people, communication skills to go out and sell myself, motivation skills, all of these leadership skills, all of this came into play. And I was like, I need to give back to the fraternity. And so I started volunteering for my fraternity. They gave me 5 chapters to work with in the Northeast to just mentor the guys. They gave me Cornell, Hofstra, Penn College of Technology, Kutztown, and East Stroudsburg. I'm sure you've heard of many of those institutions in the Northeast. And so as I was working with those chapters, suddenly their recruitment went sky high. They were recruiting the best guys on campus in big numbers, and their GPA started going up, and all these good things were happening. And then I was contacted by a founding father of my fraternity from the University of Michigan. He had moved to New York City and he had no friends in New York City. And he said, "Are you hanging out with the brothers in New York City? Because I see you're very involved, in that area." And I said, "Well," I said, "I have the email list." I said, "Let's send out an email blast to all the brothers that are in the New York City area. Let's see if they'll all meet us at a particular bar in New York City." And I sent out the email blast, and then suddenly there were like alumni from every chapter in the country that descended on this one bar. And suddenly we were flush with new members for a brand new alumni club. And so we started the New York City Alumni Club, and that did very, very well. And we were having monthly events in New York City and doing all kinds of really fun things. And so all of this good stuff was happening. And then the executive director of my fraternity ended up retiring after 15 years. There was a national search to find a new executive director of the fraternity who would be responsible for 120 chapters around the country. So not just at Penn State, but all over. I applied for the job. They were based in Brentwood, Tennessee at that particular time. My wife and I flew out for the interview. I did the interview. We went out in downtown Nashville and we said, "You know what? This is the place. This is the opportunity." And sure enough, I was offered the job and I accepted. And they, moved me out to the Nashville area. We settled in Franklin, Tennessee. And, I started working with all of the chapters and started, meeting with all the chapters. I was out meeting the chapters probably more than I was in the office, because that was the only way for me to know what the problems were. And I started noticing trends. I started noticing that on almost every campus that I would visit, it was always hazing, it was sexual assaults, it was alcohol and drugs in the fraternity and sorority system. And it was the same story every time, and I started reaching out to the Greek advisors on those campuses. And I said, "Listen, I'm working with my particular chapter, but I'd love to have a conversation with all of the fraternities and sororities, because I think we're all in this thing together." And they agreed. And I was, basically doing it free of charge just because I was there already working with the chapter. And, and the fraternities and sororities loved these conversations. And the Greek advisors were like, "He's not charging us, so we're going to take advantage of it." And before you know it, word started to spread that, I was having these talks on college campuses. And then some of the campuses where we didn't even have a chapter started reaching out to me, and they said, "Hey, we'd love for you to come and speak." But I was like, "But we don't have a chapter, on your campus. So I can't come, and then at that point, I was kind of forced to make a decision, right? After 3 years of doing this job, do I want to focus all of my attention on my own organization, or is the mission much larger? And obviously the mission is much larger than just my own organization. I can make my organization the best in the world. The problem is that, we have lots of organizations on college campuses, and we see system-wide shutdowns when there's a problem. And so clearly that tells me that I have to work with everybody, because otherwise, my kids will never have the opportunity to join my organization, right? So that's kind of where Greek University started in 2015. It was just me. I was going to, work on some of these risk management issues on college campuses around the country. And I recognize that I'm not the expert in everything. And so, I started hiring some additional speakers to come on board that had complementary skills, that worked on topics that I really didn't touch. And before you know it, here we are now in 2021. We have 16 speakers on just about every topic that, needs to be talked about on college campuses today. And we travel all over North America. So from, Maine to California into Canada, wherever fraternities and sororities are located. And it's been really rewarding work to kind of see the changes, the positive changes that happen on college campuses, and some of the events that will follow one of our talks in terms of like peer-to-peer education
Hmm.
within the college students. And so I think that's been the most rewarding part is, yeah, the speaking is great. Don't get me wrong. And I love working with the students, and they get really energized and really motivated to fix some of these problems that we're seeing. But just watching some of the events that they do in terms of peer-to-peer education following my visits, that's some of the most rewarding stuff. And seeing the pictures and the news articles and all of that stuff, and to say, wow, I planted a seed and something, a huge tree grew on campus as a result. And seeing those changes has been, really rewarding. And I think even, going to the conferences in the industry and then having college students come to me a year after I speak with them, or 2 years after I speak with them, they will find you at the conferences. I promise you, they will find you, and they'll find you and tell you about all the positive things that they've implemented. And that for me is the biggest reward. And, it's not about, the money. It's about, seeing those positive changes take root, and having those conversations a year or two after I give them the resources. That is really cool to see what they've built with it. So that's kind of in a nutshell, the whole journey from start to
Yeah.
finish.
No, I love that. It's a great, like, establishing, going out, finding success, bringing that success to apply back and like grow the areas that had an impact on your life and
Oh
make
yeah.
a positive impact on them. So yeah, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I wouldn't change a thing. I've certainly made mistakes, in my career. I think we have to kind of normalize mistakes,
Mhm.
especially for college students, to say you're going to make mistakes. College is all about that. It's kind of learning your leadership style and figuring out what works and what doesn't work. But
Mhm.
even, beyond college, I've made a lot of mistakes, as executive director of the fraternity, as CEO of Greek University. I mean, you make mistakes, but the key is to correct those things and to move forward and to get back up on your feet. And I think we've done that, in spades. And so I'm super happy about the results. I think, we have a book that came out about 4 months ago, went straight to #1 on Amazon for the college and university category. So the book's doing really well. We have over 160 episodes on the podcast. So I'm super proud of that. We're working on a second book right now, and we hope that that's going to be out in December of 2021. So it's just, it's an amazing success story, and I'm super proud of, the print that we're leaving here on the fraternity and sorority system to make it better. I'm really proud of the work that we do, and I'm really proud of the people that I work with. I think they're all amazing people, and they make me a better person. And that's really what it's all about. And later this month, we're actually going to get together in Nashville together as a team to kind of, refine our talks, our presentations, do some team building, do some planning for the year ahead. So we're one big family. And so I'm super excited to see everybody. We haven't seen each other for a while because of the pandemic. So we're super excited to see each other again, and it'll be a lot of fun.
Nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I'm glad I found your site and made that call. And
I'm glad that you did too, because I think, I'm certainly better for it. I love hearing about, interesting projects like this and what impact it's going to have on the fraternity and sorority system. And I think you're just getting started. I think, you're going to impact, thousands and thousands of college students before it's all said and done. So keep doing what you're doing. I'm proud of you. And, I can't wait to see kind of what the next steps are.
yeah, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that.
Of course, of course. Well, listen, this has been a lot of fun. To all of our listeners, if you enjoyed this talk with Rob, make sure that you like this particular video. Make sure that you share it with other college students on your campus so they can learn about Rob's project, and head over to his website, robs10kfriends.com. And obviously on Instagram, robs10kfriends. On TikTok, he's over there as well. Or just send him an email, robs10kfriends@gmail.com. You're the best, Rob. Keep up the good work. And I'm sure we're going to be talking very soon.
Yes, looking forward to it. Thanks, Mike.
Awesome. All right.
Sweet.
Sweet, man.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for taking the time to dive into my story a bit. And it was nice to hear more about yours.
Of course. Of course. Yeah, this was definitely a lot of fun. Cool. Hopefully I'm going to get this video. I hope that I am. If not, I might be shooting you a message to say, upload the video to the
Yeah,
cloud
yeah,
so I
yeah.
can download it.
Of course.
But yeah, hopefully it will appear in my account. I don't know, like it's not,
Yeah.
the buttons don't seem to be the same for some reason that I normally do, but
For me, it doesn't start converting until I leave the
till you
conversation.
leave.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but if it doesn't, I'll send it to you, no issue.
cool.
But yeah, I would love to keep the conversation going in regards to setting up some speaking opportunities. I think I did speak. I have like a handful of universities that I'm already talking to. Talking to Amazon last week was really good for credibility. I have
Yeah,
a call with Boston Consulting Group today about potentially speaking to their DEI team. Um, and I think I have like a seminar that I run on how I get to know people. And I think it's going to be like a very easy thing to apply to the college market as well. So I'll let you go for now. We can chat about that another time. I'll be in touch. But the other thing, how for my project I have a picture with everyone.
sure.
So the way I do that is once we hop off of the call, if you can just snap a selfie on your cell phone and then
Okay,
DM it to me through our Instagram chat,
sure.
uh, I will take my own photo here and I'll just put us next to each other so we have a photo for a post.
That sounds good. I can definitely take care of that. That's easy. Once I get, I'm going to try to upload the video to the YouTube account and to the podcast today.
Okay.
So once it's live, I'll certainly tag you so that way you know that it's live on our account. And what I'll do is I'm going to share the video because all the other 16 speakers, I mean, they haven't met you yet.
Hmm.
And they typically make all the decisions.
Okay.
I might be the founder, but I really kind of trusted them to make decisions in terms of who comes on. And so I think for them watching this, I think will be really important for them to get to know you a little bit and figure out how we can position you to kind of be the leader within the fraternity and sorority market for speaking.
Hmm.
And I certainly think that your talk could be really big as like a big keynote for some of the big fraternity and sorority conferences. I certainly think I can open a lot of doors for you there. And it's something that has universal appeal.
Hmm.
I talk about hazing prevention. It is important, but it doesn't necessarily have universal appeal.
Hmm.
You have this really good feel good story that appeals to every council, no matter where they are in their development as a chapter or as a council. So I think it has that broad appeal that could really take off in the fraternity and sorority market if positioned the right way. So this sounds really, really good. I'll share the video with them, and then let's talk about putting together maybe 2 or 3 talks based on your experiences here
Hmm.
with Rob's 10K friends. I would say probably have 2 or 3 talks from that to give on college campuses. So you would have a title, you would have a summary, maybe a paragraph or 2,
Hmm.
and then just some learning objectives, some bullets of
Yeah.
learning objectives of what the students are going to learn from this talk. And I think if you had that along with your photo, some links to some of the videos of the interviews that you've done, whether it be Ryan Seacrest or the Today Show or whatever, just to build credibility,
Hmm.
I think sky's the limit. I mean, you could pretty much write your ticket.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I see big things in the future.
Thank you. I am excited for that and
Cool.
look forward to that. So yeah, I'll look to hear from you today regarding the uploading of the video and stuff.
Yep.
Again, if it doesn't download for you, just shoot me a message. Um, but yeah, send me your picture in the next couple minutes.
Yep.
I'll post about you before my next meeting, which is at 1. So
All right.
I'll
That
be
sounds
quick.
good.
All
All
right,
right. We'll
man.
talk soon, brother.
Yeah, sounds good, man. Take care.
Yeah,
Thanks again.
you got it. See you, man.
See ya.